So we started talking to organ procurement across the country, and we determined that Nevada was a great test bed for it to do some of this research. We were not going to fly an organ that would be transplanted. Kind of wanted to step back and say, let's not fly another one that we're going to transplant into a patient. Let's go ahead and do some more research that we're ready to do that. Once we can prove we can do it reliably.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 297. Can a drone save lives by delivering organs for transplant? Today's guests believe emphatically they can. Anthony or Tony Pucciarella and Ryan Henderson are with MissionGO, a leader in next-generation transportation logistics and communications. Earlier this year, the MissionGO team completed an historic drone test flight, carrying a human kidney and corneas across Las Vegas via UAS. The demonstration flights showcased the real potential that drones could have in supporting life-saving medical procedures involving organ transplants. Tony is a pilot and veteran in the aviation and aircraft industries. He is also president of MissionGO. He is certified as an airline transport pilot and is rated in aircraft ranging from the iconic B-25 to the fastest business jets flying today. Ryan is a certified manned and remote pilot and currently MissionGO's lead pilot. Both individuals have significant expertise with transportation logistics. Tony has an established background in manned and unmanned aviation, engineering, aircraft systems integration, operation testing, and business. And Ryan has extensive knowledge in flight control systems, command and control links, and radio relay. He is also a subject matter expert on airworthiness analysis and has participated in global operational deployments, including disaster-stricken and harsh environments. In addition to being president of MissionGO, Tony is also founder and CEO of Alaris Pro. Alaris Pro is a fleet management company enabling enterprise UAS operators and fleet managers greater visibility, monitoring, and management capabilities. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Tony and Ryan talk about MissionGO, the company's momentous organ delivery test flight, and the future of organ delivery via UAS. But before we hear from Tony and Ryan, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have an idea for a great show and want to share your experience, please contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn how drones are impacting the delivery of organ transplants with Tony Pucciarella and Ryan Henderson of MissionGO. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Tony and Ryan to introduce themselves.
Ryan Henderson, I'm the lead UAS pilot for MissionGO, and I direct flight operations for our larger and more complex aircraft, as well as direct the operations for the medical cargo division flights. I've been in unmanned systems for about 15 years, and I'm also a certificated manned aircraft pilot as well as remote pilot. And in the unmanned world, I have experience in a variety of different areas, including aerial cinematography, precision agriculture, data relay, maritime operations, search and rescue, and of course, cargo delivery.
My name is Tony Pucciarella. I'm president of MissionGO. I am also president of another company called Alaris Pro. My role at MissionGO is I handle the regulatory interface. We've got multiple applications, as I think we're going to discuss here in a minute, with the FAA for certification of some aircraft and some operational capabilities. So I kind of head that piece of it, kind of the day-to-day business operations and business development. So I do that. And then on the Alaris Pro side, I developed Alaris Pro years ago. I served as president for Alaris Pro and kind of the chief requirements officer for developing requirements based on user requirements, operational requirements, and helping to plan that moving forward.
Tony, tell us about MissionGO. What does the company do?
So MissionGO actually started from a company that I had years ago called Alaris, and we changed the name, I guess, about a year and a half ago. But it was based on supporting the unmanned industry in a few different areas. We started writing manuals as I started the company. We started writing operational manuals and maintenance manuals and doing consulting and business development for unmanned manufacturers and large operators. And 2 years ago, I met with potential investor Scott Plank. He had seen some of the work that Ryan and I had done in support of the University of Maryland. Scott and I struck a relationship, and he ended up investing in MissionGO, as we called it. And we changed it from Alaris to MissionGO to help distinguish it between Alaris Pro and Alaris. And we really started accelerating at that point. We have three main verticals that we operate in. Cargo, as I'm sure you and some others have heard about, that we did recently in Nevada. We did a couple of flights that were kind of groundbreaking, and we've been doing that for a while, and we've got a lot more planned for cargo ops. Then the other main vertical is utilities, and we have Ryan runs the commercial cargo piece, and we have another gentleman, Joe Piazza, that runs the utilities. And then we also do public safety training. So we're in kind of all three areas, and they seem fairly disparate or kind of different, but they are actually related in that there's commonality between those that we've determined and what we're doing to keep all three of those moving forward. But we've been active in all three of those verticals. And what we're really trying to do is transform the unmanned industry, really doing logistics and inspection and training really well. And that's been our focus since I started Alaris years ago. And we've kind of moved that forward with the MissionGO flag and doing the same things, but just on a more accelerated and larger scale now that we've had Scott Plank, who's our investor, and my business partner involved with the company.
For the three verticals that you mentioned, what are the common denominators?
My background is manned aviation. I'm retired Navy commander, operational test pilot, and I was fortunate enough to be in the cockpit for most of my adult life, flying manned aircraft. What we've done is kind of pulled my decades of experience in manned aviation into these three verticals. And if you looked at them independently and kind of looking at the common thread, so we do training, but primarily we train public safety, blue light, red light, fire, and law enforcement. So out of that, we have developed a cadre of very talented pilots that support us part-time, a good pool of pilots that, one, will pass all the background checks for anything that we're trying to do because of their background. The second thing is they're used to dealing with some of the things that we have to deal with when we're doing inspection and other things and stressful environments, not breaking down when things go sideways, which they sometimes do in unmanned. That's one of the things that we see in the training side. And the utility side, the same thing. We need pilots to go out there and do some utility inspections for us. And the folks that we train and the cadre of folks that we've created through our training relationships with public safety has helped us supply or have a pool of pilots that can help us support both our utility operations and the cargo ops. And the connection between utility and cargo is that you got to do it right. One of my final jobs in the Navy was to deliver the Gulfstream 5 program, the C-37 program, to the VIP program in the Navy, which means you're almost to a zero defect type thing. You can't mess up when you're flying heads of state and others. And bringing that kind of zero defect game and precision, military precision to what we do in the cargo and utility areas is a real good fit, because when you're flying over utility lines, you cannot, or any type of infrastructure, you got to do it right. And you have to have an aircraft that's prepared, that's maintained well, a crew that's prepared and ready to go and trained well. And you got to do it right. And while things still do happen, we have this mentality and this culture that we've created between utilities and cargo ops, that we're ready when we put our game face on. We've done our research, we've done our test flights, we've done our prep flights, pre-mission planning, and everything else. So it's kind of that culture that threads through all three of those verticals. But when it comes down to doing cargo and utility ops, the common thread there is you got to have a great airplane, you got to be prepared for contingencies, and you got to do it right.
Because of the common threads, is MissionGO better able to respond to changing demands within the verticals?
Yeah, I think so. We're trying not to be everything to everybody. And, even when people look at this and say, you got three verticals in an unmanned industry, and part of it's a diversified portfolio, which you need in a market right now of different revenue streams, which is one of the reasons we have that. But the other thing is that we really feel that there is commonality and a singleness of purpose between those three verticals. And while we may do some other things, we're not doing, wind turbine inspections or anything that's a little outside of those verticals I talked about. We're trying to stay in those verticals and have the discipline to stay in those verticals. And that's one of the things that I'm doing. We have some other business areas that we're into, but they're kind of related companies and not necessarily under the MissionGO umbrella.
Let's talk about one of the applications, which was actually in the news recently. And I'm referring to the organ donor test flight. Can you describe the operation?
Sure, Ryan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the operation in Nevada was such a big success, and what a delight it was to have the opportunity to showcase, what we can do and what's possible. So that was a real honor to be a participant in that. I want to say that I think one of the concepts that we're trying to show is that unmanned systems can be used successfully for first and last mile operations on demand, and the aircraft themselves can be proven to be safe, efficient, and repeatable. It's also, in contrast to some manned aircraft operations, low cost and environmentally friendly. So those are a couple of the high points of what we are trying to show in Nevada with this organ delivery flight.
How did the idea for that particular demonstration come about?
Ryan and I, we did a flight with University of Maryland. It's coming up on 2 years ago now. It was on April 19th of 19. And Ryan was the pilot. So I did the coordination planning, and I was the director of ops for the University of Maryland. I was in that role at the time. And Ryan was the pilot. And it was approximately, about a 2-year project total, not all sized. Some of it was, we flew the first organ on an aircraft to do some testing with Dr. Joe Scalia, who's also one of my partners with Scott Plank in MissionGO. Dr. Scalia is a transplant surgeon and has been doing transplants for years. He's a research doctor for the University of Maryland. And he came to us with the concept of flying organs at the University of Maryland. And at first I was concerned just because of my background and zero defect type thing where the aircraft were not really designed. Unmanned aircraft don't have the backups to the backups, and at the time, and even now for most cases. And we were concerned about it, but we said there's ways we can do it, but we need to have all these backups to it. We had shutting down roads and doing things. We had backups with a parachute on it, and if something happened where it landed on the roof, we had a fire truck that could get it and those kind of things. And we did the flight, and Ryan did it, and he flew it. It was about 3 miles in an urban environment, downtown Baltimore, to the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center, and got lots of accolades. And I was working with Dr. Scalia then, and we started talking about how some of the work that Alaris was doing at the time could support doing more research like that outside of the university. So we started talking to organ procurement across the country, and Joe Ferreira is the CEO at Nevada Donor Network. We struck up a relationship and started planning what would we do. And we determined that Nevada was a great test bed for it to do some of this research. We were not going to fly an organ that would be transplanted. Kind of wanted to step back and say, let's not fly another one that we're going to transplant into a patient. And this was Dr. Scalia's call. Let's go ahead and do some more research that we're ready to do that. Once we can prove we can do it reliably. And that's one of our big things is, we always push that there's 3 things that I always say that we have to do when we're looking at a business case. Is it viable? Is it something that the customers are going to value, that we have a market out there, somebody's going to see the value in it, which in the organ transplant organization, in light of what's just happened recently with the crash out in LA, showing just how dangerous it can be at times to fly some of these organs and what can happen. There is there in the OPO, organ procurement organization industry. It's got to be repeatable. Can we accomplish the activity in other locations? In other words, not just in one spot. Flying something in the middle of the desert was great for us and showing what we could do, but we have to show we can do that in other locations to make it really repeatable. And then the final thing, and this comes back to that whole thread of being good at what we do and being able to prove we can do it reliable. Is it reliable? Can we prove to the customer and others in the industry and regulators that we can do the activity reliably and safely? We put that through that test, and we spent about 9 months, Ryan did and I did, finding the right platform. We found that in a Velis helicopter. It has redundant systems on it and then a parachute beyond that. And we started planning a flight out in Nevada.
Ryan, what were the design parameters for the flights?
The really exciting thing about this entire project and what we're doing is that we kind of get to write it as we go, because no one's ever done this before. It's a new and exciting world. So where we started with, really, in addition to all the things that Tony had mentioned, our base of concept and zero defect operations, is that whatever we did in Nevada, it had to be safe and it had to be well within the rules and boundaries of the FAA and other standards. We wanted to make sure that everything was in line with being safe and being successful, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, I think they could fly cargo, whether it's an organ or whatever you want to put under the aircraft. You can do it once, but it has to be safe and it has to be reliable and repeatable. So a couple of the things that we wanted to showcase: number one, that there was meaning. This operation and delivery had to be meaningful. We can't just put a kidney underneath the aircraft for the sake of flying it around. So this was research-based. And before and after both of the flights, biopsy was taken of the organs to be able to send them to a lab and have doctors look at that and analyze that to understand the viability and feasibility of carrying organs on board an unmanned system. Now, as you'll recall, we had 2 flights. One of them on the first day was shorter, and it represented cargo transport. In this situation, it was a cornea. And we flew from one hospital to another hospital under more, I would say, a developed program as we continue to test and prove these things out. You can envision aircraft traveling in 2 different directions from point A to point B, and then perhaps point B and back to point B to point C, and C back to A. So a complete logistics solution in a on-demand situation. So that was day 1, very successful in showing how that can happen. And then on day 2 was our longer flight. While day 1 was very easy, it was short range and a lighter load, day 2 was a little bit more complex. We had heavier payload and a much longer distance of 10.3 miles from point A to point B. And, one of the challenges here is that while we were flying under the FAA Part 107 rule set, we're bounded by a maximum weight of 55 pounds. And it can be a challenge to fly a heavier payload in that kind of distance while maintaining an aircraft that weighs under that 55-pound limit. So we had a very exciting day on day 2 to fly the 10.3 miles. Now, I want to say the justification behind the 10.3 miles is that 10 miles from McCarran Airport in a radius is within the reach over 90% of the hospitals in the Las Vegas area. So we're trying to show that the aircraft can fly that distance, and it's an example of a first and last mile flight over a long range. Now, of course, we perform this flight in a safe location outside of the population of Las Vegas to be able to cover that kind of distance. But the concept is there. The success was there as well.
What did you learn as a result of these 2 flights?
I don't want to say that we know it all, because we certainly don't, but I do want to say that from our experience in our past missions, what we've learned really is that our hands are a little bit tied right now, and rightfully so, to be able to operate within the rules of Part 107, FAA, and airspace. We want to do everything right. We want to do it safe, but in our situation and kind of playing within the bounds, we have to do some things that are perhaps unorthodox in the aviation world, like flying from parking lots and flying down particular routes that might not be a straight line, and in aviation, we like to take the most direct route if possible. It's part of being fast and efficient, but in the unmanned world, sometimes we have to take a detour. So those are the kind of things that we have learned to be able to stay safe and stay within the rules and make it a success.
As a city planner, I'm interested in how the drone traveled through the urban environment. Can you describe the flight path and the takeoff and landing areas?
So we looked at all the different options, of course. When we start these missions, it always starts with a site survey to understand where we're flying from and where we're flying to. We have a variety of different risk matrix that we plug in the variables to understand, what is best for everyone. So in this particular situation, we were flying from parking lot to parking lot on the hospital facility and grounds. Both facilities did have heliports, which in these particular situations are rarely used. So could we have flown from the heliport? Yes, we could have flown from the heliport, but that would pose some other challenges to us, like line of sight and crossing over some heavily trafficked areas, whether it's pedestrians or roads with moving vehicles. So we had to make some concessions and move our operations to different areas.
How did you maintain visual line of sight?
Visual line of sight is always a concern of ours. And in this situation, we did not have a beyond visual line of sight scenario because our aircraft is specially equipped to be able to hand off control from pilot to pilot. So at no time was our aircraft beyond visual line of sight of the pilot in command.
So did you have pilots situated along the route, or were they able to maintain line of sight from the two hospitals?
Right. From each hospital, we were able to maintain visual line of sight.
So obviously, going to the next day, where the distance increased to 10 miles, the challenge became more complex. Can you walk us through that demonstration?
As I mentioned, the second day was a longer flight, and we were located outside of the city in a remote location, I should say a sparsely populated location. And the way we were able to do it was to have a pre-programmed autonomous mission where the pilot, and in this case it was me, was stationed in the chase vehicle. And we had a visual observer as well in that chase vehicle. And in addition to myself, my visual observer, we had a driver. And then we had another pilot and visual observer on the receiving end. Now that was 10 miles away. Obviously, you can't see the aircraft from 10 miles away. So we had myself in the chase vehicle. We launched, we executed the mission, and the aircraft began its journey. And there was a road that ran parallel to the flight path the entire way. And, at no time was the aircraft even close to being out of visual line of sight. So we could see it the entire duration. Now, we had pilots on the other end just on standby, ready to go. Again, I want to go back to our mantra of safety and being risk averse. We're prepared for any situation. So that pilot knew at all times where the aircraft was, what its status was, and in the very worst of situations, he would have been able to take command of the aircraft and bring it to a safe landing. So that's a little bit of how we handled that particular flight.
And I'm guessing that organs in general have to be transported in some sort of special container, right? For temperature control and so forth?
That's right. The organ procurement organizations utilize a special box. There's a lot of research that's been done on these boxes dealing with the thermal properties and so forth, and we use that box. We have a payload box on board our aircraft that was designed specifically to carry those boxes. So it was the organ box was placed in our payload container. Our payload container was then fastened to the aircraft, and then away we went.
How did the battery life hold up after the 10-mile trip?
It did just great. And again, our system was requirement-based and why we chose it. And this particular aircraft, Tony had spoke about its redundant systems, and it's also a very efficient aircraft. It's a helicopter for all intents and purposes, as opposed to a typical or traditional multi-rotor. And because of its collective pitch propulsion system, we get a lot of benefit and value out of transitional lift and forward flight. So at the end of 10 miles, we could have gone substantially further. Of course, again, we always have reserves as part of our risk mitigation during a flight plan and operation. So we could have gone considerable distance further, but 10 miles was no problem for this particular system.
Tony, you mentioned that before and after, there was a biopsy of the organ material. What were the results when they compared both specimens?
Yeah, Dr. Scalia reviewed all the data and said that there was no material change in the organ that would affect transplant whatsoever. One of the things, we have some proprietary type things we've done to isolate the payload box and to do some things in our payload box that we have in our mounts and things to help mitigate some of the vibrations. These aircraft are spinning at high RPMs with not a lot of airframe to absorb the vibration. So we did some things to help mitigate that. And as it turns out, there was no material impact to the organ that would have affected transplant.
Overall, what were some of the key lessons learned?
I think one of the key lessons for us is I wish that we had had more time for more flights. Originally, when we talked to Nevada, I think we were talking about doing one flight, and we had the hospital-to-hospital concept. And then the opportunity was just too great to not be able to showcase what other possibilities are out there. And then the longer 10-mile flight was created. Everybody is just so excited about this new technology, and it was a great opportunity and a great message. I wish we had planned for more flights and more opportunity for everyone to see how this works.
And Randy, I would add too that, one of the things that we always impress, I've been in manned aviation my entire life. So this is all quite frankly, unfortunately, maybe all I really know. But what we've said too is I've worked in the military with manned, unmanned integration, and we know it can be done. We do it in the military all the time. And one of the things that we've said at MissionGO, and since I started Alaris before that, was that it's not that unmanned should be doing everything. There's an incredible amount of tasks that unmanned aircraft should be doing and can do it better, quite frankly, than manned aircraft. But what we find sometimes in the industry is that there's people trying to put square pegs in round holes. And our point is that when it comes to transporting organs, we're not telling the customer what, we're not saying, hey, here's an aircraft, this is what you should do. What we're doing is saying, we're going to do our piece extremely well, which is picking the right aircraft, making it as safe and reliable as humanly possible. And we've done that, and we're still continuing to do that. But we're going to work with you to determine where the unmanned aircraft fits in. And we have another company that actually does some monitoring on the organ that's giving us that kind of data as well. But the point there is, does it make sense to use an unmanned aircraft to fly certain routes? Is it better? Where does the unmanned fit into the unmanned-manned logistics chain? And also, what can it take over from some of the courier-based taxis and ambulances and other courier modes that are being used? How can we better those? And the way we're doing that is by looking at the entire chain of events from the time the organ leaves the hospital, from the donor location and goes to the patient, the receiver location, and really assessing that entire logistics chain and figuring out where the unmanned aircraft fits in, which I think is a little bit different because I think we're afforded the luxury of being able to do that because of some other contacts and other businesses that we're involved in. And I think that's very unique because we see sometimes where I saw this a lot in agriculture, where 12 years ago when agriculture was the big unmanned aircraft mission area, and I saw manufacturers going to farmers and large agriculture firms and saying, hey, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to use the aircraft. And I actually wrote some papers way back then and said, no, the answer is kind of how we do it in the military is requirements-based development, is you determine what they need and then figure out how you can solve that need with a unique solution. So, and that's what we're doing here.
2 flights resulted in some good information, but are there plans for additional test flights?
Absolutely. That we have Ryan and our team is working on multiple. We're under contract with other organ procurement organizations. Brian's had 2 conversations this week with the next 2, and we have flights planned all throughout 2021 with multiple organizations. Each one of those has a unique research requirement, and Dr. Scalia is helping us, in working with the organ procurement organizations and other transplant stakeholders to help us establish that research. Again, requirements-based, right? We're trying to find out, what do we need to know and how do we need to assess each flight that we do. And we've got dozens of them scheduled for 2021.
Would organ procurement organizations be the primary customer for this service?
Correct. And also the transplant centers too that are on the receiving end that are actually transplanting the organ. So, but you're right. There's 58 organ procurement organizations across the country, and each one of those has an area that they are in charge of. And their role is to service those areas by finding and helping to educate donors and donor awareness. And then also, once they do have a donor and there is a need for them to help transport and coordinate the delivery of that organ to wherever it needs to go in the country.
And to be clear, the intent is not to replace traditional organ transport opportunities, but to give organizations an alternative method of transportation.
No, that's it. You're exactly right.
Was there anything about the flights that surprised you?
For me, I like no surprises. Having, again, been in aviation so long, the surprises are the hardest things. You don't want surprises. And Ryan and our ops team executed flawlessly. And thank God there were no surprises. And while there may have been, we have lessons learned of things that we would do differently next time, but nothing, at least from the higher look or the overall look. Ryan may have some ideas, but no surprises really, which is the best type of research and somewhat aggressive project like this would have. We planned it well enough that we luckily didn't have a lot of surprises.
Most of our lessons learned in Nevada, happy to say, are small, minor things. There's always something in an operation that can be done better. Maybe it's certain wording we're using during communications. Maybe it's a format of our scripts and procedures and that kind of thing, checklists. Maybe we tighten up checklists, but primarily everything went exactly as planned. It was done with precision, as we like to do everything. And if anything, there was just small amounts of tightening up here and there. But if we had to do it again, we could, and we would do it very much the same way we did the first time.
Is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
I guess if we haven't emphasized it enough, again, the requirement-based approach and safety with not only our operations, but following the guidelines and rules set forth with the FAA and really in aviation standards in general is something that is very important to us, and we don't compromise on that at any time.
Now, Alaris Pro is a second company that you lead, Tony. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Alaris Pro, when we created it, it was a product of Alaris, and that's why we called it Alaris Pro. It's its own entity. We split it out into its own entity a few years ago, and it's been a software product that we started in about 2015. And the reason we started it was because as we're doing Alaris, the operations, and we're out there doing services and doing training, we realized very quickly that there was nothing out there that met our need. There are products out there that are geared towards the consumer brand, off-the-shelf type products, which is a very significant market in its own. But there wasn't anything that really met the needs that we had, whereas when you're going out and doing expanded operations where you're pushing the envelope and you really need to annotate and document what you're doing in a very detailed fashion using manned aviation standards that we use for decades have been proven in the aviation world, that there wasn't anything out there. So I have a background in airworthiness. I've done airworthiness for large unmanned aircraft for the Navy as a consultant and contractor in the Navy's Triton program and other aircraft as well, and also worked with the Navy's airworthiness office on a couple different projects. So my background is in, you have to be able to document and prove that you can do these things reliably, whether you're flying an organ, flying over utility lines, or trying to get approval to fly beyond visual line of sight or over flights over people. You have to have documentation that shows how you can do it reliably. And as you remember, we said, you got to be able to do all these things reliably if you want to prove to the regulators that you should be able to do it in multiple locations and over people and things. So we created Alaris Pro, and what it does is it is a scaled version of what we do in manned aviation. The manned aviation products really don't work for the unmanned for a variety of reasons, and we see that unfolding exactly the way when we started this 6 years ago, is that there wasn't a fit. You can't just take what's used in a corporate flight department and plug and play that into an unmanned aircraft flight department. It just doesn't work. So we started this from ground up and starting with the first line of code, not based on anything else, and wrote it the way that we know from as being operators, the way that we know it should be done and what we need to document, but also threading in that manned aviation culture and the experience and leveraging lessons learned from what's already being done in manned aviation. And we created Alaris Pro. and we've been developing it. It's an ongoing project. Anybody that's in software will tell you it's never done. You're always modifying and improving and adding features. And we're very fortunate to work with some stalwarts in the industry who recognized years ago that this is where they wanted to be. And that's what we're doing. We're in a different market than others. We are not necessarily focused. We have all the consumer aircraft in there. The drones is the smaller things you can buy in Best Buy and some of the other products. We have those in our database, but because a lot of our operators that even fly 1,000-pound systems have smaller systems for photo birds and for other things, site planning and things. So we have to cover all of those. But our target market is really medium-sized to big. We call them medium to big aircraft. And we're talking to customers upwards of 6,000-7,000-pound aircraft, all the way down to some of the smaller aircraft. Our goal at Alaris Pro is to improve the safety and reliability by connecting the manufacturer and the operator, which is a unique thing that we do, so that manufacturers that are out there can, as they sell an aircraft, they get this de-identified data back to help them make design improvements. And that connection is something I've always wanted in manned aviation. It's just never been there. I've owned airplanes and been flying airplanes my whole adult life, and that connection's not there. And what we did is, starting from ground zero, we were able to build it up and build that into it. So connecting manufacturers and operators in a very unique way and allowing them to communicate when there's issues on either end in near real time has been one of the tenets of what we wanted to create.
Tony, since you've been in the industry for a while, what advice would you offer to other entrepreneurs?
I would say there's enough business for everybody. Work together and network. There's a group of, I can pick up the phone and talk to some pretty large manufacturers and operators in the country, because we're not exclusive. Even if somebody's not a customer now, we always think that someday they might be. And we're very inclusive and trying to network and work with each other and learn from each other. It's a very big market that's coming. And I would recommend that entrepreneurs look at the long term. Don't look at the short, shiny object that's in front of you. There's enough shiny objects to get distracted as you're marching down a development path on a hardware, software, or services product. And I would say keep your focus on the long range and the goals that you have, but also during that time, try to have some, I call it the diversified portfolio. It's an interesting market right now, especially with the COVID impact. And us being in a few different verticals has helped dramatically. When we're not flying in one, we're flying in another vertical. So I think diversify and then, in what you're doing, but also stay true to your end goal of what you're trying to do and network as much as possible. It's a very tight-knit industry of the folks that are around. Years ago when we'd go to AUVSI, we all used to stand around with this group of folks that we would be working with that were in the industry and have been around for a while. And we'd say, I wonder who's going to be here with a booth next year. So we'd see companies come in at Exponential and have a 40 by 40 two-story booth, never heard of them before, and then next year they were out of business. So there was a lot of that. I think that has stabilized. And I think what you're seeing now, people that have really good ideas, that have weathered a lot of storms and are moving forward with some very, very creative ideas in unmanned. It's an incredible industry. I'm blessed to have had a full career in manned aviation, done some of the really crazy and cool things in manned aviation. And to have this at this stage of my life, to be able to kind of start another career that's exciting as unmanned aviation is just absolutely a blessing.
Is there a story or a lesson learned from your association with Scott Plank?
It's interesting is, as you were telling me that you're into city planning, that's Scott's background. And Scott is an incredible storyteller. And I learn from him every day. He says he learns from me, but I think I'm doing most of the learning. And he's an incredible business partner. I'm in business with him in a few different areas. And his knowledge, his degree is in urban planning, and he's been in urban planning. He gives a lot back to the community. He's been in a very fortunate position where he can give back to the communities. He's helped build police stations with his own money and done some very interesting things in trying to help urban communities. And what he's been able to do is really thread us into that urban environment in a way that I never could have. For example, before we went out there and flew the 10-mile flight and the cornea flights in Nevada, Brian and his team were out there flying, almost daily during the week, flying items across Baltimore Harbor. And that was Scott's idea. That was not mine. I wanted to just fly things to show that we could do it reliably. But Scott said, let's learn from it. Let's learn the urban environment and let's do some things. And so we were flying pizzas and smoothies and things across Baltimore Harbor. Instead of us drilling holes in the sky in a remote location to get flight time and to finish off our test cards, Scott had this idea of doing it in an urban environment, which I love. I love doing difficult things. Ryan and I have always kind of picked very challenging things. He and I have been fortunate enough to do some firsts in aviation over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think you could appreciate too, with your background, some of the difficulties in the integration into an urban environment and flying aircraft around where there's helicopters and other things that you got to be cognizant of. And then also just people seeing fairly good size unmanned helicopter flying across an urban environment was interesting. So I think I learn from them all the time. And I think that's probably the most recent thing that I think your listeners might find interesting.
And my final question to you both, what message would you like to leave regarding the impact that drones might have on the future of organ delivery?
Again, I want to go back to the reliability and efficiency of unmanned systems. We do feel that they are safe, and we're making improvements on that every day. Aviation's been around a while, but this new unmanned endeavor is new, and we're making great strides to make it as safe or safer than manned aircraft. We think that unmanned systems aren't going to be the end all, and rather it will be a supplement to manned aircraft operations. But we definitely believe that unmanned systems have a place, a very unique place, in the logistics of organ delivery.
And Randy, if I could add in there too, I'd like to say that there is business to be had within the construct that's out there right now that the FAA has allowed us in the National Airspace System under Part 107 and other areas, 44807 and some other permissions that you can get. And we always tell our public safety customers and everybody else that we're training is it's too easy to follow the rules and not follow them. We stress compliance and not just internally. We don't just stress it. We require it, demand it, and everything we do is based on being compliant with the rules. There's a variety of reasons why it's the right thing to do, and you got to follow the rules. But I would encourage everybody that there is business to be had within that construct, and don't feel like you need to go outside of it. Having proper insurance and all the things that we should be doing. I'd stress that. I was just, when I was voting, I was in a long line like a lot of others. And there was a Phantom 4 flying right over top of my head at like 50 feet and a line of hundreds of people. And I went out there and talked to the guy, and he was a 107 pilot. So he had his 107 license and pushed back when I told him that you can't do that. You can't just fly over people. You can't be this close to them. And he finally shut it down. But those are the things that concern me, because that's what's going to, I don't think anything's going to stop it, but it certainly could delay it or put a pause on things when somebody does something silly like that. So I think the industry is getting really good at policing itself, and I would just encourage everybody to continue to do that and be good stewards of the industry, because there's a lot to be done and a lot of businesses to be developed and grown within this industry, and we just need to be good stewards of that.
That's it for episode 297 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tony Pucciarella and Ryan Henderson of MissionGO. I want to thank Tony and Ryan for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about MissionGO or want to connect with Tony and Ryan, check out the webpage at missiongo.io. If you want more information on Alaris Pro, go to alarispro.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.